Okay. Hi everyone, my name is Alex. I'm the historian for Tomo no Kai this year, and welcome to our Day of Remembrance event. So this is an event that Tomo holds every year, but obviously it's a little different this year. We're over Zoom, but it's a day that's celebrated nationally, where we sort of honor and commemorate Japanese Americans and the events that happened back in 1942, when President Franklin D. Roosevelt had signed Executive Order 9066 because of irrational fears that stemmed from the Pearl Harbor bombing, which led to the incarceration of people deemed as threats to national security. So this led to over 120,000 Americans of Japanese descent to be forced into internment camps and incarcerated, with 80,000 being actually American-born citizens. And in this process, they lost a lot of aspects of lives, like their properties, their homes, their jobs, their careers, all those things. And so today, what we want to do is pretty much remember the events that happened, honor the people who have experiences, and sort of just start that conversation because of how much it's affected our families, our communities, and our country. So today, what I did with Tomo is we invite guest speakers to speak about their own experiences regarding incarceration. Today, we have two very special guest speakers today who have some really interesting and amazing speeches. And then after the speeches, we'll also be opening up a Q&A for anyone who has any questions for our speakers, if they want to talk about anything or, I don't know, clarify, ask any fun facts or anything, but that will be at the end. So if you do have questions, just please note them down or just table them until the end of our event. And so without further ado, I want to introduce our first guest speaker for today. He is a veteran of the 442nd RCT and was part of the Gila River internment camp. So now I want to welcome Mr. Yosh Nakamura. I'm going to share my screen so we can see some photos during
What? Is it me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you very much, Alexandria, for the introduction, and to the Tomo no Kai organization on UCI to honor the Day of Remembrance. It's also a pleasure to be on the same stage with Ken Inoue, a very well-known leader in the Japanese American Citizens League. I'd like to have you just imagine you are in a junior in high school, and when you got home, that's right, fine, thank you. And when you got home, you were met at the door and your family said, "You are no longer a member of our family." That is the impact of that I felt after the bombing of Pearl Harbor by Japanese imperial forces. It was soon thereafter that Japanese Americans were classified 4C as enemy aliens, not eligible to volunteer for the armed services. There were wild rumors about us that were actually interpreted by commentators, newspapers, and political figures as truth. And maybe some of you are familiar with that kind of thing more recently. Anyway, we were painted with the same ugly brush in describing the enemy. But I thought the bombing of Pearl Harbor was a big mistake. Japan had no really natural resources, a very small place. And America was a sleeping giant, had little interest in war, but the bombing awakened people, so they wanted to go to war. Yes. In February 19, the day we are recognizing today, but February 19, 1942, President Roosevelt issued Executive Order 9066 that made possible the incarceration of people of Japanese ancestry, alien or non-alien. How would you like to be called? A non-alien as an American citizen?
Yeah.
What? Yes, I know. I just meant. When General John DeWitt's headquarters was informed that the Japanese Americans had done nothing wrong, the response was, that's the very reason they should be taken away from the West Coast, because they might commit sabotage. But I think most of you are drivers of automobiles. And how would you feel if you were thrown into a prison-like area and stripped of your constitutional rights because you might harm or kill someone with your car? The general was so blinded by his dislike of anyone with a speck of Japanese blood that he incarcerated orphans as well in Manzanar and other isolated camps away from the West Coast. I got to know one of those orphans, Tom Fujimora. He became a noted sculptor, a fine young man. A police officer who was a neighbor of Grace and her mother mentioned to her, my late wife, Grace, mentioned that he had never seen nor heard of a Japanese American in jail.
That's
So he
right.
couldn't understand the exclusion order for such law-abiding citizens. Now, these photos show first the evacuation notices, and they were posted on the telephone poles and buildings. You couldn't turn anywhere without seeing this exclusion order. And we were told to report at a particular spot, depending on where you live. I had to go to Pasadena. Now, what would you do if you were given the order to leave your home? And what would you take with you if you could only take what you could carry?
A little suitcase.
It's a very, very trying time for people to have to dispose, sell, give away, or maybe some neighbors are willing to hold some of your goods for you. But that was a reality of the time. My father had to sell his farm equipment, his car and trucks and a horse. And it was a heart-wrenching experience for most people of Japanese ancestry at that time. But the hardest thing for me to part with was our pet dog, Doggy. Look at these photos here. On the right side, you see evacuees carrying their suitcases, briefcases, and children. This one is from Bainbridge Island in Washington. On the next slide, please. We were, Grace mentions there was a statement on the top of a poster to the entrance of the exhibit of the incarceration of American citizens at Hyde Park at the Roosevelt Library. And there's a description of the camps, but on top of it all, there was a quote from Grace saying, when the bus stopped and the people saw the tar paper city, there was silence. And you can see the Century Tower that surrounded most of our camps. I was sent to the, we can go to the next slide. Here is the Manzanar on the left-hand side. And to the right, you can see all these soldiers, my gosh, shoulder to shoulder, watching the evacuees. And anyway, I was sent to the Tulare racetrack concentration camp, euphemistically called Assembly Center. And my most humiliating experience was the walk from the train station to the racetrack with curious residents watching us, watching this spectacle, and armed soldiers with fixed bayonets all along the way. It was very, very humiliating. And I can still hear some voices of children asking their parents, where are we going? And why are these men with guns? And so just imagine a whole host of people carrying their goods on their arms or on their backs. When we got there, we noticed the camp was surrounded by barbed wire, and the sentry tower that you just saw were around the camp. So we asked, why are these things here? And why are the soldiers up there armed? They said, it is for your protection. But the searchlights and the guns were pointed inward. This is where the next slide, this is where Grace had gone to Manzanar, but this is in the historic site. And she is explaining to a group of visitors about a quote that is on the top of this display panel. And she just could not erase the memory of a young couple with 4 children, 2 crying children hanging on to the mother's coat. The mother carrying 2 babies, and the father with a back full of diapers and other needs for children, and carrying a duffel bag and a suitcase. And it was a type of a nightmare that she just could not erase.
You skipped ahead one.
What?
You skipped one page.
Okay. One of the things that I would like to mention is that maybe in the next slide, when we finally, and this is her quote up there in the next slide, is you'll see a camp. This is, there were cookie, like cookie cutter made architecture. They're all about the same layout and everything. And you can see this one, but the Manzanar one shows you a little more of what life was like there. The next slide. On the left-hand side, you will see the lack of privacy in these camps. Many of the women, very, very modest people, would wait till late at night or very early in the morning to use the bathroom or the shower because there were no partitions. And you can imagine what it was like for modest people, and it was just hair-raising. When I finally got my high school diploma in 1999 at El Monte High School's ceremony, a newspaper reporter asked my friend, Wally Leonard, what did you do when Japanese American students and friends had to be evacuated?
Say which one is it.
And here is Wally Leonard on the back row on the left side next to me. I'm on the end and Wally Leonard. And this is from the 1943 annual, or 1942 annual, showing junior class officers. It was there in Tulare that another friend of mine.
You didn't say what he said.
Oh, yes. Well, what did he, the reporter asked, what did you do when, we were evacuated? And he said, a group of us just sat on the lawn and cried. That's how it affected him and was hard on him as well as for us. It was in Tulare that Ken Morgan, who was a classmate and a neighbor at El Monte High School, came to visit me at the Tulare camp. And he was so shocked that an innocent guy like me was in a prison-like place, that he couldn't talk about it for another 30 years. I certainly don't want this to happen to another group of innocent people. This is why I am willing to share my story whenever possible. Kenneth, Wally, and many other friends kept my hope alive. I had faith that someday America will realize that the incarceration was a mistake. My history teacher said, don't worry, the Constitution will protect you. But he had no idea that the Constitution had nothing in the guise of military necessity. Did you know that not one US citizen or a resident of Japanese ancestry committed any act of disloyalty was arrested and convicted for any crime that is un-American? Not even one person. And sometimes what we think is a reasonable assumption could be very, very wrong. We had Japanese faces, but American hearts. I don't know if any of you Asian American students at UCI have experienced any harassment or other unkind actions recently. Today, if you look Asian, many people do not know nor care you are guilty of spreading the coronavirus. I hate to see the history repeating itself. My hope and faith came to pass with the passage of H.R. 442, an apology for the incarceration and treatment of Americans of Japanese ancestry by both houses of the US Congress and signed by President Ronald Reagan in 1988. And see him in this photo. A presidential congressional commission studying the incarceration of American citizens during World War II concluded that the action was based on war hysteria, racial prejudice, and lack of political leadership, and not on military necessity. It takes a great country to admit a wrong and apologize for it. That made me a prouder American. I'll talk about the picture on the left later, but I want you to remember that Eleanor Roosevelt visited our camp in Arizona, and the fellow in the middle was the student body president, and the one on the left was the annual editor. So anyway, I'll get back to my journey from the Tulare concentration camp to Gila concentration camp in the hot Arizona desert. To make the gloomy barrack classrooms as normal as possible, I and others students decided we should organize student government clubs and activities. In fact, I got so involved that my geometry teacher took me aside and said, you know, if you stayed in class longer, you might learn more geometry. So I took his advice and I passed with a B. But the experience of starting a student government activities and clubs was a good experience for me in that it helped me organize students and organize things. So doing this from scratch did help me in my later life in the Army, in my college life, and in my professional life.
Go back one slide.
What?
Ever go back one slide.
What?
Ever go back one slide.
Oh, yeah.
Can you go back one
Okay.
slide? Yeah, there.
Okay. Then at the Gila camp, we had two camps. One was called Butte and the other Canal. At Butte High School, I ran for student body president, and I didn't make it. I did make it to the runoff, but Kim Nagano was a very popular guy, and he won the presidency. But he became one of my best friends afterwards. I also had the pleasure of Nishira Wegland as my campaign manager. She did a fine job, but wasn't her fault that Kim was more popular. But I would like to say that not only was she active as a student at Butte High School, after she went to Hunter College and had a career as a costume designer for Perry Como, she went to Washington, D.C. and started looking at the archives. And with the Freedom of Information Act on her side, she started looking into the record of the early war years and discovered how little was really justified in terms of military necessity, and so much more that she wrote a book called Years of Infamy. And her work helped get more information about what happened to Americans of Japanese ancestry during World War II. And a lot of things that were unknown to most people were discovered in the archives. So that's the book called Years of Infamy. The picture I showed you earlier of Eleanor Roosevelt visiting Gila River, and that's Don Kajihara, the editor. As a result of her visit, she was able to talk to her husband, who was the president, to treat Japanese Americans as Americans. And I think she was about as good a friend as you can have. You know, I'd say that Nietzsche is probably one of the first to discover that military necessity was not the reason for the incarceration. But along came the loyalty questionnaire that was required to be answered. One question puzzled us all, and that is, do you forswear allegiance to the Emperor of Japan? And if you answered yes or no, you could be tried for perjury, because how can you forswear something that you haven't sworn to? But I figure the people who devised the questionnaire felt that yes was a better answer, so I answered yes. And the other question was, are you willing to join the armed forces of the United States and go wherever ordered? And I wonder how many of you are listening, and if you are of military service age, would say, yes, oh, I will volunteer, or I will serve. If you were denied the constitutional rights and you were enclosed in a prison-like environment. But I wanted to show my loyalty, so I answered yes, and that's the same as volunteering. It is from the Gila camp that I joined. I reported for active duty and trained in Camp Landing, Florida, and was eventually assigned to the 442nd Regimental Combat Team in France. And I saw action, military action in France and Italy. I learned a great deal about the heroic work of the 442nd and the 100th Battalion all the way through my military life. And I learned about the heroic rescue of the Lost Battalion, where one of my friends, Jim Yamashita of I Company, was only one of 8 people coming out of the battle, rescuing the Lost Battalion out of the whole company, and without being injured or killed. The survivors of the rescue, the Nisei soldiers, received letters from the daughters of the rescued soldiers, and they are full of gratitude because their fathers could come home and become fathers and have a family and a good life. And so, to me, when I see the military cemeteries, it really makes me sad, because here are these young men who could have had a great life with families and gone at such an early age. the people who, the daughters of these rescued soldiers were just full of gratitude. And even the governor of Texas granted honorary Texas degree to our 442nd Regimental Combat Team. So we're happy to be honorary Texans.
Explain what that is.
Yeah. Now when I look at the cemetery and see these fallen soldiers, and I'm really privileged to be able to represent them since I'm alive, and there aren't too many of us around anymore. And these fellows wanted to be sure, as well as the rest of us, that our families and the Japanese Americans who follow us will have the privilege of being proud Americans. The 442nd became the highest decorated unit in the armed forces history. And did you know that another 6,000 men served in the Pacific War and made possible the shortening of the war, according to MacArthur, by 2 years by their work as interrogators, interpreters, translators from documents, and intercepting communications. According to MacArthur's headquarters, the US Army forces were never more prepared than they were under those circumstances. This is the Go for Broke monument, and on it are these statements. This is about a block north of the Go for Broke National Education Center, and it's on the corner of at the
First and
yeah, where Central Avenue and First Street meet, and the center is there, and about a block from there is this Go for Broke monument. It's a good resource for any of you interested in knowing more about them. And across the patio is the Japanese American National Museum, which also has a lot of information about the role of Japanese Americans during World War II. The 442nd Regiment was honored by the White House grounds by President Truman, attaching another presidential unit citation on the flag of the 442nd. And he said, "You fought the enemy and prejudice, and you won." On November 2nd, 2011, the Japanese American veterans of the 100th Battalion, 442nd Regimental Combat Team, and the Military Intelligence Service were invited to the nation's capital and presented with commendations and the Congressional Gold Medal. Next slide, come on. It's the gold medal on the left side. I was amazed with the politeness with which Democratic and Republican lawmakers treated each other. And of course, they had a lot of good things to say about us. So it was a very, very touching time. Then on June 23rd of 2019, the California State Senate passed a resolution and asked for surviving members of the 442nd and other Nisei veterans to come to the Capitol, to the Senate chambers. And we were presented with commendation and a standing ovation by these senators that lasted, I think, at least 10 minutes. Really quite a heartfelt experience. I would like to mention that I've had the great privilege and honor of having many, many people who encouraged me, advised me, and helped me all my life. And I've been fortunate to have a family that I'm very proud of. An immigration attorney, Linda Oberholzer, whom you probably have, she's my technical advisor, a dedicated secondary science and math teacher, Daniel Nakamura, and internationally respected artist and Aikido expert, son, Joel Nakamura. They are in this photo that you see on the right. And I'm proud of the other members of the family as well. My late wife, Grace, is in the front. And in the back, next to Daniel, is Paula, his wife. And then next to Linda is Joel, and then Kathleen, his wife, and my two grandchildren, Paloma and Kai. It's amazing now to think that that little guy is from 2015 to now. He is a second-year student at the University of New Mexico, and Paloma graduated with honors from Scripps College. So I'm proud of all of them, and I think that they are setting a pretty good example for other people too. The reason for the photograph is that there were 5 of us who rode in the Go for Broke float in the 2015 Tournament of Roses parade. And so that was a terrific experience. I was fortunate to have 2 careers, one as an educator and as an artist. I started my professional life as an educator at Whittier High School, and most of my professional life at Rio Hondo College, being the founding chair of the Fine Arts Department, an art professor, and retiring as a vice president, but I'm still an artist. When President Ronald Reagan was a captain under General Joe Stilwell, who knew of the great work Japanese Americans soldiers did in murals and marauders behind enemy lines in Burma, Captain Reagan gave this speech at the burial ceremony in Fountain Valley for Kazuo Masuda, a Congressional Medal of Honor recipient. And I quote, "The blood that has soaked into the sand is all one color. America stands unique in the world, the only country not founded on race, but in a way an ideal, not in spite of, but because of our polyglot backgrounds, we have had all the strength of the world. This is the American way." Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much to Yosh for sharing his story. It's super moving, super insightful. But before we move on to the next speech, something I wanted to incorporate from our typical Day of Remembrance events are our Joe Daiko performances. It was something I really enjoyed last year when I first went. I just liked seeing them perform. And that was something I wanted to bring back this year as well. But obviously, unfortunately, our Joe Daiko Sister Club cannot perform live. So instead, what I did this year was stalk them on YouTube, and I found their YouTube channel, and I found one of their old performances. And so I just wanted to share that with you guys so you guys can just enjoy the performance as a little break during today's event. So I'm gonna reshare, and we can just watch their performance. There we go. It's loading. Load, load, load.
Excuse me, but is there any sound? I don't have any sound.
Oh my God. Were you guys not able to hear it the entire time?
Right.
Give me one moment.
Thank you.
I have never done this before, so let's figure this out. Anyone in cab want to help me out?
So when you click on share screen,
Yeah.
does it state share audio as well?
It's actually under advanced features. Go to share screen, advanced, optimize video for screen sharing. Sorry, it's the teacher in me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I doth not see that. Is it audio settings?
It's at the bottom of, you go to the advanced share screen, advanced, and then at the very bottom, it says optimize for video clip. Or share sound.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Thank you. Wait, let me. Tell me if you guys can hear it this time.
Yay, thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry. So that was just a short little Jodico performance as a little intermission event. I know the audio, sorry about that at the beginning, my bad. And I know the quality might not be the best, but if you guys wanted to take a look at other performances or see this one in better internet, because mine might not be the best, you guys can look at their own YouTube. It's just UTI Jodico. If you just YouTube that, you'll actually be able to see a bunch of their other performances. This one was just the 2019 Gardena one from the Obon Festival, but you can see others from their spring concert. So yeah, Alex plugged it into the chat, so thank you. You guys can also look that up, but I hope you guys enjoy that. It was one of my favorite parts of Day of Remembrance from last year, so I just wanted to include that this year. But without further ado, I want to now introduce our second speaker for the night. He is a super stellar member of JA community and a super stellar active board member of the JACL. So now I want to welcome Mr. Ken Inouye, and he'll be sharing his screen for his part of the presentation. So take it away, Ken.
Okay, I'd like to first of all thank Tomo for allowing me to make this presentation today. I'd like to acknowledge my son-in-law, who is a Gen 2 Jodico person who is helping me with the presentation. I'd like to tell all of you it's a rare privilege to be able to see Yoshi in this presentation. I was fortunate to see Yoshi and Grace make their presentations to a number of community groups. And I can assure you, as you probably already know, that they are truly community treasures. So thank you for allowing me to make this presentation and sharing the program with yours. My program today is a personal kind of review of the JCL effort, the redress effort, and the time that I was a member of the JCL National Board. As I was making doing my research, it brought back a flood of memories. It just made me realize what an incredible journey it was for the Japanese American community to get reparations and an apology as provided in the First Amendment of the Constitution, which guarantees a community's right for reparations. And the next page is kind of a notation. It's saying that I was a member of the board, and it's also my personal recollections. I've tried to be objective as possible, but at the same time, it no means necessarily represents the JCL experience as a whole. And also, since I was JCL, it doesn't necessarily, in fact, it does not include the efforts of other organizations, such as NCRR and other organizations across the country that contributed to this great effort. This page here kind of shows the key dates that were part of the redress and reparations. Of course, it started off with December 7th by the bombing of Pearl Harbor by the Emperor of Japan. Then it goes all the way to October 1990 when the first redress payments were made. It's a 49-year journey. It was an incredible journey. It was something that shows that the system works in America. I'm not sure it would work today given the tribalism that exists in Congress, but I'll try to highlight each one of these points as I go through my presentation. As Joe says, this is Executive 9066, and it did pave the way for the illegal incarceration of Japanese Americans. We are here today to remember this occasion, but I have to tell you, the redress effort made two significant changes in the way other communities were treated. Because of the redress effort after 9/11, two things happened. On a national level, Norm Mineta was Secretary of Transportation with George Bush, and George Bush said he would not treat Arab Americans the way that Norm Mineta was treated. And as a result, this country did not illegally incarcerate people of Arab descent. In Orange County, the supervisor, Cynthia Code, she had a press conference after 9/11. She made a statement saying, "We're not going to treat Arab Americans like we did Japanese Americans. Let the government take care of the problem, and you people in the public are not supposed to take any kind of reprisals against Arab Americans." So the legacy of 966 lives today, and it was an important reason why this country was able to stay stable after 9/11. The road to redress was something that was hard for the community to deal with. Most of you people aren't probably or may not have been able to talk to your grandparents who are incarcerated. But I can remember as a young person, the only time that our people talked about the camps was when they would meet somebody. And the first thing they would say is, "What camp are you located at?" And of course, they never said anything else. And as a young man, I never understood the full impact of that. But over time, people like Eiko Heizo Yoshinaga, she was somebody that researched and found out that under the Freedom of Information Act, like Yoshi said, it was real clear that the government did not really think that the Japanese American community was a threat. In fact, the FBI and the Department of Navy both said there was no need to incarcerate Japanese Americans. They would be loyal. In fact, point of fact, one of our members in JACL had gone back to Japan, and this young general named Tojo, and I don't know his first name, he actually told Japanese Americans, your mother country is the United States, not Japan. So if we go to war, your mother country is the United States. During the early strategy of working on the redress effort, JCL embarked on an education effort and employed John Tateishi, who many of you may know or know of. He was very important in getting the word out to people about the internment, because a lot of people did not know it happened. So across the country, through 110 chapters, people went out to speak to people. I remember I was invited to speak to numerous community groups, including the Naval Whipping Station, Los Alamitos. And people were amazed that our country had done that to Japanese Americans during World War II. After the ACL decided that we were going
doing door right now. Door?
I'm sorry? Okay. After JCL decided that they were going to actively lobby for reparations, they created a nonprofit organization called the Legislative Education Committee. And I had the privilege of knowing these two individuals. Grace Uehara, she was about 5 foot tall, but she was a tiger. She made all the men in the room cringe because she would say, "What have you done today? What have you done? Who have you lobbied?" And the other gentleman, Granucci Fusa, was somebody that was really well connected in Washington, D.C. He was a strategist, and he would really come to the meetings and help us orchestrate our legislative strategy as the bills went through Congress. The leaders of the LEC were also Jerry Enomoto, who was an individual that was considered to be by many somebody that was very respected and somebody that would command loyalty. Then Mr. Minya Sui, if you hadn't met him, he was just an incredible man. He was one of the Supreme Court cases that was denied, but he actually went on the day that the curfew came out. He walked the streets of Portland and said, "Arrest me. I want to test this law." But he was so well known and respected by the people in Portland, they said, "Man, go home. We're not going to arrest you." And Mitt, true to his form and his tenacity, he took his case all the way to the Supreme Court. In the meantime, he was put in public, isolation. And it was just something that he was just incredible. I met with a local congressman from San Diego. And after we made our presentation, he says, "You know, Ken, I can't support your bill because I don't have enough of your kind in my district." I knew what he meant. And I told him, "Does that mean you don't have enough Americans in your district?" And he really didn't understand what that meant. I think he did, but he wanted to admit it. One of the strategic moments in the redress reparations policy, strategy, was the fact that instead of trying to go to Congress directly with bills that would demand redress reparations, the sitting members of Congress, the Japanese members of Congress, said, "You really need to have a hearing, an independent hearing that would allow this group to listen to what had happened, and to come back with recommendations on what should be done. Now, the community was kind of angry with this approach at first because they thought that every day that passed without something being done, people were dying and they would not see justice. But nonetheless, people followed the recommendations of the members of Congress. And there were hearings through 11 cities, and over 750 individuals were interviewed. When the commission finally issued its report, they concluded, and as Yoshid said, that the internment was caused by racial prejudice, war hysteria, and the failure of political leadership. And I will tell you that the thing we can control is the people we elect to Congress. We need to elect people to Congress that understand the Constitution and Bill of Rights works for everybody, and not just those people that look like the same as us. The commission also recommended an apology and a one-time payment of $20,000. It was interesting, very early on, some people thought the payment would come early and the apology would be harder. It was actually the opposite. Many people were willing to make the apology, found it uncomfortable to make a payment to individuals. The JCI leadership during this redress time, there were quite a few people that I had the honor of serving on the national board. But the first one was Mr. Harry Kajihara. Back in those days, I was a junior district governor, went behind the years, and Harry Kajihara would take me under his wing. And we would talk about at night about, do we really have a chance? Who cares about our community? We're so small. And Harry would just look at me with that grin and say, Ken, we'll win because we have justice on our side. And ever since then, I've been a proud American with the belief that with justice, you can win anything. The other person on this slide is Ms. Rose Ochi. Unfortunately, she just passed away. But she was one of the senior members of the national board and had the most contact with elected officials. On the next page were other people, part of the redress team. Dan Yasuhara, he was a real fighter. He made sure that JCL kept on the redress path. And he was intimidating. It's kind of a scary place to be on this board because they were so intense and with good cause. They lived through it. Mei Takahashi was another one, as well as Cherry Kinoshi. These people really led the charge for JCL. We thank them for it. Now, as you know, in order to get bills passed, you need to have support in Congress. But at that time, we had two very noble members of Congress, the Honorable Norman Netter, Honorable Robert Matsui. I've had the privilege of meeting both of them, very great individuals. But at the time that redress came on, their staff privately told us, hey, these guys just got elected. They don't want to be known as Japanese. They want to be known as Americans. So it was kind of awkward for them to take the lead on this, but they did. Now let me point something out to you. When the bill was passed, it had 166 co-sponsors, which means that basically those people had agreed, they would agree to vote yes on the bill when it was presented on the floor. When the bill was actually passed, it had 243 votes, and you needed 218. And to his credit, Norman Netter voted present because he didn't want to vote, seemed like he had a conflict of interest. Those two men's efforts are really significant and should be honored forever in the redress story. Also, the Speaker of the House, Jim Wright. Now, Yosh mentioned the Lost Battalion. Jim Wright was the Speaker of the House from Texas, and one of the reasons he was on board for the redress bill was because of the Lost Battalion. He was a strong ally, and with a small majority in the House, there is no question that his support was a major reason why we passed redress. Honorable Barney Frank, he was a tiger. He was one of the strongest advocates for redress and reparations. He took it upon himself to make it a personal cause. And then the guy on the right is the godfather of JCL, Clarence Nishizu. He was from our chapter. He was instrumental in getting 2 members of Congress from Orange County to vote for redress. And again, I really believe that those 2 members from conservative Orange County probably had an impact of the way people voted. Okay, now you got the House, now you have the Senate. The Senate is a very different ballgame. There's only 100 guys, and they're there for 6 years. So they get to know each other. They don't have to worry about being elected every 2 years. And they had, back in those days, they were very collegial. They were very willing to listen to what people had to say. In the early days of redress, on the Senate side, the Honorable Sparky Matsunaga, he was the most personable guy you'll ever met. I mean, he would just hug you and make you feel so good, even though he might have been a hockey puck like me, but he was just very friendly. Like, he was so persistent. I mean, the story was that he would follow people all over the place until they became co-sponsors. So when the vote finally, so the bill had 71 co-sponsors. So it was passed before it even was presented. That was the impact, of course, of Sparky, as well as Senator Inoue, who I will speak of later. Senator Inoue is the godfather of our community. He's somebody that we should always be, I guess, grateful for. I'd also wanted to know, as I did my research, that Senator Mcconnell, somebody who's still around today, was originally a co-sponsor but changed his mind, reasons only he knows. Okay, now, when President Reagan signed the bill, it was quite amazing. First of all, there's one character in that picture who happens to be the same Congressman Lowry, who said he couldn't vote for the bill. He had the nerve to attend and be in the picture. But, you know, the sad story is they invited the wrong Congressman Lowry. There was a Congressman Lowry that was a strong supporter of the bill. And unfortunately, the wrong one was invited. It also should be noted that, as Yoshid said, President Reagan was initially opposed to the bill. Being a fiscal conservative, he thought that it was unnecessary to make monetary payments. But the sister of Kazuo Masuda wrote a letter to the president and said, do you remember back during the war when the people in Orange County would not let my brother be buried in Orange County? You came forward and said, yes, that the blood of all Americans is the same, and you made sure that my brother was buried in Orange County. And with that letter, President Reagan said, yes, I will sign the redress legislation. On a personal note, I got to tell you, shortly after the bill was passed, I took my family to Manzanar. I told my girls, who were too young to remember, that this is the greatest country in the history of the world. Because I can't think of another country that would admit it, make a mistake, and try to make reparations for having done so. This is a great country, and I think we should all remember that, that you just sometimes need to stand up and fight for what you think is right. Now, one of the things that happens, even though the bill was signed, it didn't provide any money. So even though we were very elated over the fact that there was a bill and it provided for payments, there was no funding. This is where Senator Inoue came in. Senator Inoue, like I said, was the godfather. He was one of the most senior members of the Senate. And in part of the discussion about budgets, Senator Inoue convinced other members that the redress funding should be called an appropriations bill, which guarantees funding. And as an appropriation bill, yes, the money was there. In an interview, Senator Inoue indicated that he had to call in some chits in order to secure the funding for the Civil Liberties Act of 1988. I got to tell you, when I had the privilege of meeting Senator Inoue, even though we have the same name, it was so odd, and I'm sure he didn't remember who I was, but it was quite something. He was quite a man, and they had a strong presence. Of course, then the redress payments then were made to the surviving attorneys, and it was really something, like I said, an incredible journey. Now, it's like, I'd just like to let you know that the JACL is currently supporting HR 40, which gives the African American community the right to seek reparations. Now we have supported the right for a commission to be set up. We don't know what they're going to say, but we believe, along with the spirit of the First Amendment, which allows communities to seek reparations, that the African American community should do the same. Now I want to just close with this. One of the things I mentioned earlier was the fact that, as you know, part of the reason we end up in camp was because of political leaders that didn't understand the Constitution. The sad thing for me today is the fact that with the way that people are elected to office, there's a significant amount of tribalism which prevents people from voting their conscience. And I have to tell you that there's two shining lights in Orange County. Elected officials who have decided to go out of their comfort zone. Lisa Bartlett, a Japanese American supervisor, came forward and said that she would not endorse a candidate for state office from the Republican Party because she had harassed women. That took a lot of nerve. That supervisor put her career on the line because she believed that nobody should be represented by a predator. How many people would do that in today's political environment? And yet, also newly elected Young Kim, another Asian woman, recently spoke to censure Congressman Green, was so egregious, their outspokenness against people of color. So this is a lesson, guys. It's a lesson of how the system works. And it's a system of I guess it's also a lesson of our responsibility to elect people that share our values and understand the Constitution and Bill of Rights. And I would submit that there are probably some of you out there that could be and will be future leaders at different levels. And I would hope that when you make that journey, you realize that we are on this together. The Constitution only works if you fight for it and fight for the rights of others. So I thank you so very much. And I will turn the screen back to Alexandra. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Ken. I'm sorry about my incident. I love Zoom. What can I say? We love it here. Woo. Okay. But thank you for your speech. It was super insightful, very educational, and it was I had a lot of, it was just nice to learn about that process. And so to end our event before we close it out today, I wanted to open up a Q&A session for anyone who might have any questions for either of our speakers. Feel free to either just unmute yourself and say it out loud if you're comfortable, or if you want, you can just put it in the chat and then I can just read it out loud and direct it towards whichever speaker. So if anyone has any questions, oh, you have some people raising their hands. Valerie and Vivian?
Hi, thank you so much.
Hi.
I was actually JCL president in Detroit, so all of this Redress history is very dear to my heart. And also as a French teacher, have researched the 442nd in France. So I want to share one thing for all you younger ones in college. I was about your age when I was very active and I met Bob Matsui, congressman. And he said to me, you have to be in the room. Those decisions are made over cigars and wine, and you have to be in the room. And that really stuck with me because I was an activist and I was like, rallying and fighting from the outside. But that really changed my mind and got me into kind of the more mainstream, if you will. My question, though, is also for Yosh. I'm curious whether, in terms of France and your service in France, I was with Easy Company at the reunions. Do you have any thoughts on the friendship with the French and the memorial pilgrimages that the Nice veterans have made over the years?
Oh, yes. Linda, my daughter, attended some of the reunions, tours of the battlegrounds. Yes. And I would say that my experience has been pretty positive. The French people seem to be very appreciative of our freeing them from Nazi Germany. So I wasn't there for too long, but enough to get that sense. And I returned there later while we were touring Europe and spent quite a bit of time in France and really enjoyed their food and their art and generally they've been very good to us.
Yes.
Yes, there's two people on this call, Alan Nishitani and Stuart Harai. They're experts in like the 442 in France, and we went to Brewers, and the people were so happy to see us, and they remembered one of the veterans who came with us, Lawson Sakai,
Oh, I know Lawson very well.
and
What
they
a
remembered his kindness at a Christmas party, and the daughter of the little girl that was the recipient of the gifts was there, and they were just so kind to us.
Oh, that's beautiful. Lawson was my link as well. Awesome.
They seem to have a parade and really a great celebration whenever the people come to visit the battlegrounds of the 442nd.
Well, if you'd like to go back, I'll organize it.
No, I see.
Thank you. Merci.
Can you see her name?
What?
Can you see her name?
Anyone else have
Isn't-
any?
No,
This is Elisa from Manzanar, and I have been posting in the chat, Yosh, about how you are too humble and how your actions literally changed the course of world history the night that you and the others climbed Mount Foglarito and surprised the Nazis. And I've encouraged people to let me know if they would like to read the oral history transcript that you approved, because it is fabulous. And I didn't let you be as humble in your oral history as you are tonight, because you're a true hero. And I'm not just saying that. I know that word gets thrown around a lot, but I've known Yosh for almost 20 years. And I had no idea of his service or his accomplishments. Now, those of you who know Grace might say that's because he couldn't get a word in edgewise. But he, she was wonderful about sharing history and sharing her stories. But usually when they came to Manzanar, she would talk because she was in Manzanar. And it wasn't until later that I got to hear some of Yosh's story. And so I just encourage all of you, if you're interested, I can send that transcript like to you, Alexandria, if you'd like, and you can share with others, because I'm on my personal iPad, so I don't have it on here, but Yosh did a fabulous interview, and we love you very much, Yosh. Thank you.
Well, that's because you were a good interviewer, you see. And besides, I just want to make sure that there are so many men that lost their lives or really fought long, hard battles there in Italy and France that are the real heroes. And I'm just lucky that I'm alive and that I was I was able to participate in a small part. But the real heroes are now gone.
That's I have to disagree, Yosh. I disagree. But I will say, and I hope it's okay that I share this, but one of the things that Yosh said in his interview as he was climbing that near vertical mountain that night in April 1945, and as some men fell to their death in silence as they fell off the cliff, that Yosh said to himself, or said to God, if I survive this, I will be a good man. And I just want to say, Yosh, I've only known you for 20 of your 90 something years, but you're one of the best men I've ever met. And I'm not just saying that to impress all your Zoom groupies. You are truly a fabulous human being, and just, yeah. So thank you. I think you made good on your word to God. I don't work for God, but I'm just thinking, I think so.
Well, you do a fabulous job at Manzanar. So, I'm really glad you're there.
Well, thank you, Yosh.
Thank you so much. I'd be happy to share those interview resources. If you can just message me the links, I can work with other CAB members to disperse it to our general members and stuff like that. So definitely, if you can just message me privately with those links, and then I'll do something with that. Okay.
Yeah,
But-
just send me your email, because I don't have those resources on my iPad. But send me an email with your address and I'll get them to you from my work email.
Okay, I'll message you privately then. But we do have some other questions. So Alex.
Then, were all of the people in the 442nd Japanese Americans, and as casualties occurred, were they replaced by other Japanese Americans or by non-Japanese Americans as you went from France into and finished in Italy?
Well, it's amazing how the Army has been able to trace down all people of Japanese ancestry. And when I joined the Army and was trained in Camp Landing, Florida, there were Japanese Americans who came from Oklahoma, Wyoming, Idaho, some Hawaii, California, and, all the West Coast. But from one fellow from Louisiana, who was a football player. So, no, it was a segregated unit. And the only people who weren't Japanese American were some of the officers. So I would say that the Army at that time had segregated units, and in a way it was particularly beneficial to us because we took care of each other very well, and we had a little more purpose to be there than perhaps some of the others. But the replacements were Japanese Americans. So I was one of the replacements myself.
Yosh, I'd like to just interject. As you know, one of the officers was Colonel Young-Ho Kim, who is a Korean American who was also a leader.
Kim.
Oh, yes. Well, he's a very interesting fellow in that when the officers wanted to assign him to the 442nd, said, well, you're Korean. Are you sure you want to be with these Japanese Americans? And he said, they're Americans and I will be their friend. So, he was a really remarkable guy.
I'd also like to add that he was one of the driving forces behind the Go for Broke Monument in LA.
Yes.
We have good memories of him.
Okay, we have some more questions for you guys. So Alex, go for it.
Hi. This is for Ken. I also just wanted to thank you though for like the very in-depth and informative presentation and stuff. Really appreciate that. So my question in a lot of ways I think is that kind of moving forward with the Asian American community, especially the Japanese, I believe that a large amount of us, given just our participation in Tomo and stuff, want to help foster our community more. And I was wondering how can we be a better ally or just help remember kind of the sort of atrocious behavior behind our country and kind of furthermore into the future?
Alex, that's a great question. I think it starts off with everybody has a different threshold of time that's available. I think it's important as a minimum that if you see something that's going on with your friendship group or your community, if there's something that you think needs to be explained, let's take a minute and just say, well, maybe we can discuss that further.
What can you do as a person to foster community?
Okay, and I told my daughters as we were growing up that as Japanese Americans, we have an obligation to help others because we've suffered the prejudice that other communities have not faced. I also told them you don't go to a KKK meeting and tell them what to do. I do think there are other ways to do that through volunteerism, to just talking to people. I've got a lot of friends that don't agree with me politically about things, but we always discuss them. So at least they know there's another side to the issue. But that's great. I think the first thing is to recognize that you can make a difference. I think it's important to know that in this country, as great as it is, freedom is not free. And to realize that if somebody is not free, then you are not free either. So thank you for the question. And I hope to see you in the future working on community things. It's a grand adventure. We can make America really what it should be.
One of the things that come to my mind is that, first of all, you take some of these challenges to learn something and, make any hard life things become part of your foundation for something better. And I would say that it's really important for people to respect one another and to be kind. And it's amazing by doing that, the return is, unbelievable sometimes. And they're not coming from the same people you had befriended. But your attitude does help to create an environment for a little better relations.
That was a great question. Thanks, Alex. Next, I think Caitlin has a question to ask. Feel free to unmute.
What's the question?
Okay, my question is, so I wanted to just say, that I think it's amazing how Mr. Nakamura shared his story. I think that's amazing how you shared it. And, I really am grateful for, you know, soldiers like you who really, dedicated their lives to protecting a country that put them into a place that, discriminated against them. And I think it's just amazing how, people like Mr. Nakamura just came to fight for America. And my question is, how did your family feel when you decided to join the army, and how did you feel when you received the Medal of Honor? And yeah.
Well, first of all, I had a family that is a little more unique than most families. I lost my mother when I was almost 6. And so I had 2 brothers, a sister, and
your dad.
And my father. And during the evacuation, it really impacted on my father because he was used to taking care of us, and he would have nightmares and would fall off his cot and injured his back and shoulder, and he just never was the same person after that. So I'd say that that part, my older brother, we call it Nissan because he was 9 years older than me. And so he was almost like a second parent. And at that particular time, I, with my brother and sister and my father, who was handicapped at that time. They accepted the fact that I was be part of the armed forces. They weren't very happy about, because in war, if you're in the battle, one day may be your last day. So they understood that, and so did a lot of my friends who were in the camp.
And how did you feel about the medal, congressional?
Oh, well, the Congressional Gold Medal was given to us as a unit of Japanese Americans during World War II, because I think the services that we rendered were unique and outstanding.
And how did you feel?
Well, I felt very honored by that, and I felt that it was a nice feeling that people, especially the governmental leaders recognized what we had done. So I'd say that it was very good. And our whole family was there, and the people from all over the country came to Washington, D.C. For the ceremony. And as I mentioned, it was just amazing the climate that was created with the Senate and with the leaders of both the parties being so civil to each other, and you know, people like John McCain saying, how great we were, and even Mitch McConnell saying that, we had the secret weapon. Were the Japanese American soldiers. So,
and when he got off the plane, they had organized like a cheering squad to greet everyone. So the whole plane was veterans, and like when we got off the plane, he felt like he was a rock star or something.
so no, I'd say that there's we welcome the appreciation that they've shown us, and I think I was quite impressed with all the people who were there. I got to meet the Congressional Medal of Honor, which is given to individual accomplishments during the war, and Barney Jiro had passed away by then, and he was a member of my company, and his son and I have become good friends. So anyway, I'd say that war is not something that you should take lightly, and when politicians rattle their hand or hat or whatever they have, saying we ought to bomb them and or do this and that, that should think about the consequences and be very careful and very thoughtful about how to solve a problem. And sometimes something without warfare is better. So that's the way I look at it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next question, Emily, want to ask?
Hi, this is a question I have for Mr. Nakamura. And I know that you mentioned that you tried to organize some student government and clubs. And I was wondering if there were any other examples of ways people tried to keep their spirits up while they were interned, and other types of ways that, like as a community, people tried to come together and kind of maintain a sense of normalcy.
Well, for one thing, people had a lot of free time. There wasn't. Fortunately, we weren't laborers for the government. Going out and breaking rocks and things. So a lot of people went into learning about art and flower arranging and a lot of the cultural things. And for others, they had quite a bit of fun playing baseball. That seemed to be the sort of a thing to let the steam out. Is they played quite a bit of baseball, and some were very good at it. So on the rough sand or dirt and in camp without lawn, and some guys played football, but I think baseball, usually you play on that type of, so that was pretty good. And then some track. There are people who did some things with music, discussion groups and things like that. there were different ways in which they coped with being interned. Unfortunately for some, they just couldn't get over the fact that they were being blamed for Pearl Harbor and for, whatever the Japanese imperial forces were doing to American forces. And some of them never could become what they could have been because they had this horrible thing over their head, the dark cloud. I think the probably an analogy would be for some women who get raped, that somehow, did I do something that, encouraged it, or did I do something that, to get this punishment? And so I found myself that probably the best thing for me was to forgive people for the dumb things they've done. And because if you're mad at them, you're the only one who knows that you're mad, and maybe people around you. But the real people who caused this condition, unfair treatment, etc., they're not worried about you anymore. They're often doing something else. And probably a very good example is Lou Zamperini. He was a prisoner in Japan, and he was tortured. And when he came back, he started drinking, and he was in really bad shape. And religion got hold of him, and finally he decided that he just has to forgive that guy that has punished him so much. So he actually went to Japan and told the guy that tortured him that he forgave him. And Lou Zamperini was a track star at USC and then in the Olympics. And he's a very, very, famous fellow. And I think that sample is a good one where forgiveness does something to you personally. So different people handle things differently. And I found that if you forgive people and you don't forget, but you don't have to be, scheming ways to get even, all the time. That could be very detrimental to you. So that's my opinion.
Thank you. Next question, Lisa, you want to ask?
Thank you very much, Yosh. I really appreciated your, your presentation tonight, and I watched your Unsung Heroes video. That was, I love that as well. My question is, after reviewing and seeing your whole bio, which is so impressive, I'm curious what you would say is your greatest life achievement, because, it's our duty to make sure that your legacy is remembered. And so I'm just curious what you would highlight as your greatest life achievement, because your biography is
well, thank you.
extensive.
There was a fellow from Georgia who found my name somewhere and wrote to me and asked, what would you like to be remembered for? And what would you say to those who are having problems, And the thing that I would say is, I would feel very good about having made a difference in the lives of people I've touched. And I think that that goes with my own family, my friends, my colleagues, positions I've had and things that people have mentioned that I have made a difference for some of them. And And I think that is a pretty good reward. And for the other question that the guy raised was, what would you suggest for people having problems? And that is what I said before. You look at every situation like a learning experience and get the most out of it, and then go on and see. And if you treat people decently, with respect, and I think a lot of problems would be solved. For instance, if a policeman sees a black driver, and if this policeman sees him as maybe a neighbor or someone else that he knows, might be very different from looking at him just because someone told him that he's probably violating some law or something like that. Preconceived ideas that people have. So if you approach people with respect, I think it would really be helpful for the whole community. Okay.
Okay.
Well, thank you. Just thank you for your service and for, continuing to improve lives with the gift of yours.
Thank you. Enjoyed meeting with you folks today.
I think last question for tonight. AJ, you want to ask your question?
Yeah. So during your presentation, Ken, I know you said that you told your daughters that America was a great country for apologizing and admitting its fault. I was wondering how did they take you telling them that? Because personally, if my parents told me that somebody that did something wrong to my ancestors was an apology made it better, I don't know if I would be okay with that still. I was just wondering how your children reacted
Be okay.
to
It wouldn't be okay.
you
Wrong
accepting
them
the
if they
apology.
just apologize.
Well, thank you very much. That's a very good question. At the time that I made that statement, my daughters were relatively young. But the more important thing is that they independently have decided to take on social justice issues because of the experience that they've seen through JACL. JACL has been a major part of our lives. So the history of the internment is something that they've realized for years. And in different situations, they've all gotten involved. My oldest daughter is still involved with JACL. In fact, she's the chapter president locally. She was a national officer. And she tells my grandchildren that that's something that's precious, the fact that we are an American and that we need to fight for the rights of others. My other daughter was my Huntington Beach daughter. When I was the chairman of the Huntington Beach Human Relations Task Force, she was one of the student representatives. And she took a leadership role in this city in trying to make sure that people understood that social justice is correct. I do have a footnote. Even though I was the chair of the commission, the mayor only had her on TV. And I asked Mayor, I said, Ralph, I'm the chair. Why are you putting my daughter on TV? She goes, Ken, your daughter's cute. What can I tell you? My youngest daughter was also involved in the Orange County Human Relations Commission. She was part of the community, the student group that went out and spoke to people. And she was a strong advocate for people's rights. So it's something that it's an environment that we've grown up with because we've had the privilege of working with so many people, not only within JACL, but other groups that understand that this freedom that we have is precious. It's worth fighting for. And I just have to add one more comment. I mentioned the fact that I was the chairman of the Huntington Beach Human Relations Task Force. That was 20 years ago. At that time, Huntington Beach was considered the hate crime capital of the world. About 15 years ago, we thought we got all the bad guys out of town. Unfortunately, with the recent problems in Washington, D.C., we found out that some of the leaders of that insurrection were from Huntington Beach. So the lesson learned there is that you need social justice is like a garden. You need to be ever vigilant and make sure that you do what you can to make sure that you protect other people's rights. So thank you for the question.
You know how Pastor Paul puts the moon
All
behind.
right. I think that was such a good way to come full circle. The whole reason why we have DOOR is to sort of just spread awareness, start the conversation, and continue on the legacy of everything that people like Yosh and Ken have done for the JA community. And so with that being said, I'm going to conclude this year's 2021 Day of Remembrance event. Thank you guys all so much for attending. I know it's very different this year. My bad for my 2 mix-ups, but it's fine. I just totally recorded everything, so it's going to be for everyone everywhere to see all over the internet soon. But you know what? That's just 2021 for us. But anyways, thank you guys all for coming. I really appreciate it. Tomo really appreciates it, and the JA community really appreciates it. So thank you.
You're welcome.